So beginning beekeeping 101, and this picture that we started with, that's a colony from an attic space. So on a building, if you see up here, usually there's an opening up there that gets into the roof. And on this particular structure, there was an opening that bees found their way into. So we go in through the kitchen ceiling, and that's how we access bee colonies to relocate the colony after it's already established. And then here's the wax cells the bees live on. And our overview for today, sorry, I'm just figuring this thing out. It was a different computer than last time. So understanding bees and their role, and how to get started in beekeeping, and the essential tools that you'll want to look out for if you're starting, or whether or not you have some experience. We're going to hit some fundamental beekeeping practices and then lightly touch on harvesting honey and going over the hive products. Honeybees are fairly indiscriminate as to what they want to eat. If they can access it, they'll get it. They're pretty greedy. This is an onion flower. So an onion honey tastes really gross. It's kind of like almond honey. They do a lot of onion pollination contracts, so the bees go out and pollinate, so they have onion seed to plant the next round. And that's how they divide the crop. Some are either production for market value to harvest the vegetable to sell for consumption, and then the other half is to make more seed so we can continue that operation. So basic honeybee biology and behavior. Bees have a social structure, and they have 3 castes: the queen, workers, and drones. The queen is essentially a female that gets taken care of when she's young with a lot of royal jelly and a lot of care. The workers are also female, but they are malnourished through the gestation process, so their ovaries are not developed. So they don't produce the eggs like the queen does, they don't produce the pheromones, and the pheromones is kind of what does the mind control and controls the rest of the colony. So that's how they prevent all the bees from fighting for dominant position. And the males are there basically to donate sperm. And one thing about drones is the queen chooses to fertilize an egg. When she fertilizes it, it's a female. If she does not fertilize the egg with sperm, it becomes a drone, a male. So you have a female bee creating a male with one genetic line. So it's kind of a weird, funny thing, because normally you need a mom and a dad to make a baby. So bees are very unique in that aspect, and the genetic tree is something we'll cover in a class. And we're going to lightly touch on a lot of this stuff because almost all these topics per page can be a module for a class. Foraging behavior. Workers forage for nectar and pollen from the flowers. The nectar is their carbohydrates and the pollen is their protein, vitamin, and minerals. When pollen gets wet, it's sterile, so it rots really fast and goes bad. So that's why flowers are continuous bloom. It's an insurance policy that their whole crop doesn't get rained out at once. And they bring the nectar back to the colony. They work all day to collect the nectar, and at night they work to fan it to evaporate it down to honey. And they have an enzyme in their stomach that changes the composition of the sugars, which we'll talk about. They communicate through dance when they're navigating, and we'll touch on that in a bit. And that's to navigate toward food supply, or a new place to live, or a water source. And they use the waggle dances, which we'll touch on. And hive maintenance. Bees work collectively to build, clean, and protect the colony, and that ensures the colony's survival. So when the bees are the youngest, they are house cleaning. They're cleaning the empty cells, any debris that falls, any ants that get in there. The youngest bees, that's their job, because they don't have the flight muscles yet to go out and forage, nor do they have the knowledge of where to even go to look. The older bees are the ones that scout out for food and come back and tell the other ones where to look.
How long do they live?
About 45 days, because their wings just get tattered. It's like if you couldn't change your car tires, the first flight you got, that's where your car ended up forever. But bees will live 3 to 4 months if they don't have to fly. So overwintered bees have a lot longer lifespan because they're not putting the flight miles on. Huh. So they work collectively. When bees get mid-age, they start to forage. And then when they get a little bit older, they start to be the guard bees and the scouts for new locations, either for new food or new locations to move if they want to swarm. So this is how the bees communicate with the waggle dance. The comb is drawn vertically, so the comb is hanging vertically. And much like if I tell you, hey, meet me at 1 o'clock at the grocery store. If you think about it, you know which 1 o'clock I'm talking about because most likely grocery stores aren't open at 1 in the morning. So think of that concept when looking at angles with the bees. If the food source is 40 degrees away from the sun, they'll mark that at the angle at which they're tipped in the colony. And that can go all the way down to 90 degrees because that's where the sun path is going to be throughout the day. And I know there's a 180 degree path to the sun, but if you cut that in half, it's either going to be 40 degrees left or 40 degrees right. and they know based on the time of day if it's going to be this side or that side of 40 degrees, much like nighttime at the grocery store versus daytime. And the intensity at which they wiggle, that denotes the distance to the food supply. And I don't know if that was me. I have a loose wire up there. Bear with us.
Might be the HDMI.
So the intensity of that waggle denotes the distance. So they're getting all the information they need when one bee does a wiggle. Depending on what angle it is and how intense they wiggle, that gives them all the info they need to know. And if more bees keep doing the same waggle, that denotes a higher interest in that. If I go back and I find something that's not that great and I want to tell everybody, no one's really going to care. But if one bee comes back with an awesome new food supply, it says, hey, come check out what I got. And then more bees go out there, and if they like it, they're going to tell more and more. So word of mouth and a quorum kind of dictates on what they're harvesting at that time. And different flowers will produce nectar at different times of the day. So you'll see some bees on some plants, especially the squash in your garden. If you see squash and pumpkin, the bigger the flower, they generally don't tolerate the heat very well, so they close quickly. So you'll see the bees on the squash in the morning, and you may see them on a different plant in the afternoon, depending on what that plant's working on. So when we have a swarm, when a colony leaves and lands on a branch, the bees will also be doing the waggle dance on the cluster of bees. No colony or anything. That's how they're navigating to figure out where they want to move into. And it could be an eave of a house, or it could be the hollow of a tree. I've seen them move into cars. I've seen them move into irrigation boxes, cable boxes. Anything you can think of that bees can fit into, they'll move into. Thank you, sir. So importance of pollination and our ecosystem impact. Honeybees are invasive. They're not from North America or South America. They're from Asia and Eastern Europe. So a lot of those people came here and also brought their plants with them. So we have a lot of invasive plants. We have a lot of invasive insects. The Native Americans called them the white man's fly because until the Europeans brought honeybees and yellow jackets over, there were just very small colonies of social bees, like bumblebees. They don't have more than 100 in there. Blue orchard mason bees are solitary. Carpenter bees are solitary. So they were used to solitary or smaller groups of bees before they brought them over to the Americas. And I think in the 1550s, one of the first books was written about beekeeping in America. And it said it only took 2 or 3 years for the hills of Massachusetts to be full of colonies. And that was back when they had all the old chestnut trees and before logging took into effect. So now we see more structures inhabited than trees because we have a lot less old growth trees in this area. So role of honeybees, the more plants they pollinate, the more seeds they produce, the more plants that grow. So it helps with erosion control. It helps sustain native pollinators. And it also creates biodiversity. So it brings in birds, brings in predatory insects. And the more plants that grow, you can keep the soil a little bit cooler. So you're going to retain a little bit more water in that area. So bees all around help the ecosystem as long as they're not impacting a native pollinator. And we have ways to mitigate that as beekeepers. Plant California natives is one of the big ones that you can do for that. Agricultural benefits. Bees enhance the yields of crops and out in the fields, and also some in the orchards. They don't want honeybees because they pollinate way too many flowers, and either the branches start breaking or all their peaches are this big, and they have to pay somebody out to go thin them so they can get full-size ones. So depending on the crop you want, you may not be looking at the right bee. They have alfalfa bees that live in the sand. They're ground-dwelling bees, and alfalfa has almost like a mousetrap. It snaps open when the blossom is opened, and that scares the honeybees. But these ground bees love it. So they're using different types of bees for different products, and they're vastly increasing their alfalfa production and yields up there. Pollination maintains natural ecosystems by enabling plant reproduction. I'm sure if you walk along the River Parkway different times a year, you'll see the fireweed or the tarweed, you'll see star thistle, you'll see a wave, and it's almost like a conductor going through the year. There's almost always something blooming at any one time to keep them going through. Our vernal pools, we have some over there by Phoenix Park. That's another example of a landscape that was really conducive to have bees around because the more plants that grow prevent that erosion from happening in the clay. These bees are fanning. They're putting their butts in the air, waving their wings to put the pheromone out to let the rest of the bees know where the new home is on this swarm recovery. That would be a queen bee. From the front, they look relatively similar, the head and the thorax, but when you get back to the abdomen, it's when you get a real noticeable difference. These back legs on the queen are also a lot different than the other worker bees. To me, Almost looks like a spider leg, the way it hangs off the back. And they're often going to be the same color as the body. Whereas worker bees, their back legs are going to be the same color, all black, black, black. And you'll see a big difference in this color on there. And most of the queen bees are a little bit more bald. So this has a shield on her back, I call it. Reminds me of an old medieval shield. And she's pregnant right now. And when the bees starve her, she'll shrink up so she can fly. Because if they have to swarm or move and they don't shrink her down, she just turns into a glider. When she comes out of the tree, she can't go up, she's too heavy. So they have to plan when they want to swarm and when they want to get the new queen to take off. And they're just a little bit bigger. If she's buried in there, it's really hard to notice her. When I'm looking for the queen, I more so look for this behavior. It's like a celebrity going through the crowd. You see people, ooh, wow. And she walks around the whole colony distributing her pheromone, and the other bees come up and collect it and spread it to other bees. And if you were to pull the queen out in 5 minutes, they know she's not there anymore. That's how sensitive they are. She's the one that's reproducing. So she mates one time in her life with 20 to 30 drones, and she stores that sperm for the duration of her life. So at some point she's going to run out, and you'll start to see more and more of these holes as the failed gestation occurs, because she can't, if she's not fertilizing them, they're male bees, and the male bees can't fit in these worker cells. Workers perform the various tasks of cleaning, foraging, guarding, and protecting the colony. Drones are the male bees. I don't have a picture of a drone on here. They're only produced in the spring, and that's when bees do their mating flights. So the bees mate. Once the drones mate, they die, because the females have stingers and the males don't. And so when they mate, it gets ripped off just like a stinger would, and they die. And the drones can't. Their tongues are too short. They can't forage very well, so they have no contribution to the colony except for genetic input. And because she mates with 25 to 30 drones, her genetic input is very, very wide, very deep gene pool. And I don't think it's any one particular trait in a colony that allows it to succeed. I think it's a mix of genetics that allows it to do well. You know, school district's not going to do well if everyone wants to be a janitor. You know, not everyone can be the principal. So everyone's got to do a little bit different job for this organism to succeed. Little pollen mosaic. Bees, they don't do it religiously, but they do segregate their pollen when they bring it back. They generally visit one type of flower as they're out and about. And they're not too religious on that, but it's if they have a pick of what they want, they're going to fill up on one type of forage, because it's wasting time to go hit one, hit the next, hit the next. If you're grocery shopping, it takes you an hour because you have to go to each aisle. You could just fill your cart in one shelf, but nobody wants just one shelf. So I think, in my opinion, bees segregate things much like we segregate our medicine and our herbs in the cabinet. I want this taste, so they go grab some of that, or I want that. Or maybe just that combination of all of it is the nutritional benefit when they're raising their young, because that's their protein. So this is going to drive tissue growth on a growing larva.
They eat the honey, or that's just pollen?
That's just pollen, and they mix it with about 10% nectar so they can pack it. Kind of like a sandcastle. You can't build with dry sand, so a little bit of moisture in there helps things form. And that's fermented. So this is going to last all through winter into the spring. And it's got a really crazy taste compared to the little round pollen bits you see for sale at the store. Those, they put pollen traps on front of colonies, and it knocks the pollen off as the bees go in. So fresh pollen every day, they collect that. So this is my favorite. This is a little bit more hard to get a hold of. And that's a beehive. We've got our bottom board. We've got 3 boxes tall on that. When you see bees out in the field, they generally have 2 boxes tall. And there's 10 frames in each box. So 30 frames in there. So 60 sides. There's a lot of surface area in there. So if you're going to choose a space for your apiary, that's what we call bee areas, an apiary. Apis mellifera is the Latin name. So you'll see api a lot in honey. So sunlight exposure. Choose a site with good sunlight to promote activity. It's kind of like an alarm clock. If you're facing west in the morning, it takes you a little while to wake up, but you'll have a little bit more of a nightlife. And with bees evaporating nectar into honey, the warmer it is, the more they can circulate the air, the quicker they'll be at dehydrating the nectar into honey. But the more sunlight they have, the more exposure they have to heat. So they have to go collect water, spit it inside the colony, and they fan it to keep it cool. So evaporative cooling. So ventilation is good, and you can pack them in, they're pretty tight. You can even have them touching, but as long as they have enough airflow, they can ventilate and not have a problem. If we pack 100 people in here, it starts getting really hot. People want to come outside and hang out. This is what the bees are doing. It's too hot inside, so some are coming out to lower the inside body temperature. Protection from the wind. I like a little breeze. Like I said, the ventilation helps get that moist air out after the bees are processing the nectar into honey. Sometimes I'll put ratchet straps around the colonies if I'm in a high wind area. So if they fall over, it at least stays together. If those fall over without straps on them, all the 10 pieces fall out like you threw a deck of cards out on the ground. And the bears do that too. The bears knock them over and then they smash them. So if you can get a strap on them, that'll reduce the amount of problems you can have. This is elevated for skunks. Skunks are vulnerable on their belly, so this is up high, so when the skunks come up to pick out the colony to eat bees, it exposes their vulnerable area. And also mitigates any problems with flooding. If you have too much water down there in a heavy rain event, you don't want this getting wet. It's going to trap the bees and they're not going to be able to get that moisture out once the wood's soaked. Access to water. Provide easy access to clean water sources for bees. One of the code requirements to have bees in Sac County is to provide a water source. I've put out clean water for them and they go to the dirty groundwater, they go to the neighbor's fountain. So I think they're going for the electrolytes. So if you just throw a little clay in there, maybe a little dash of salt, and then you can float a couple sponges or corks in there, and that keeps them from drowning. I've seen people put a towel on the side of the pool so it hangs out, so if any bees get in there, they can come around and make their way out. Abundant forage plants. If you live in Wilton, you're not going to get much honey. There's an oversaturation of beekeepers, and there's not a lot of forage out there. It dries up and all you get is star thistle. If you live in this area, you get the maples and it rolls into citrus. Not too far behind that is blackberry and then star thistle and all the elms. So we're really taken care of in terms of the urban areas. But if you're somewhere, maybe in the foothills, you may only have manzanita and star thistle. And if you're by water, you have blackberry. So keep an eye on that, because the less food you have out there, the more colonies there are, the more competition you've got between them. Selecting the right bee species. Some bees pollinate better than others. Carpenter bees are the best because if they can't access a flower, they'll rip it open. They're looters. They're nectar looters. And once they pop it open, honeybees will actually follow them around because they know that they'll break it open and then they can go get the nectar after that. It takes anywhere from 45 minutes to 4 or 5 hours for a plant to replenish its nectar in the flower. Regional climate suitability. Some people live up in elevation. It won't really have an effect people up below 3,000 feet, but once you get up higher and deal with the snow or the hard frost, you might want to go with a Russian or a German line of bee. We do pretty well here with the Carnolians and Italians. And different breeds of bee are going to have different defensive levels. Some are going to have better honey production. Some may sacrifice their being docile for a spring buildup, so they build up really quickly in the spring, as opposed to another one where they have a little bit more conservation with their resources. Beekeeping goals, align those. Have a reason why you want to beekeep. Do you want honey? Do you want to help pollinate? Do you want the wax? There's so many products of the hive that you can get out of there. And having a goal really helps you succeed. I don't go on a colony unless I have a reason to and a plan. Much like going out in the garden. You don't need to go out and touch things too much. It kind of stresses them out. Local regulations and requirements. Beekeeping is the least regulated aspect in livestock. You can't have 10 cows, you can't have a bunch of roosters. You'll have code enforcement over there pretty quick. But you can really get away with quite a bit in terms of beekeeping. Most lots are zoned for 2 colonies, and it goes up to 4 and then 6, depending on the size, or if you're zoned for agriculture. I lived downtown a few years ago, and I had 26 of them in a little Victorian house. So you can way pack them in. I'm not advising it, but we were packing them in there. So legal compliance, you have to register your colonies, and this is stuff we'll go over in the beekeeping classes. Proper hive placement. We don't want to put them in a front yard where they're facing the sidewalk, where a dog on a leash might nose up to them, or a 5-year-old might go, "What's that?" Problems occur that way. Some of the county sprays, they apply sprays as they're driving with those vehicles. So if you have stuff out front, drift could be an issue on a windy day. So proper hive placement's important. Bees will go toward light, so you don't want them on your back patio, because at night they'll be right in your face. Even they'll get attracted from fire pits. So the light from a fire, that'll attract bees, and bees are not happy at night. And then disease control measures. We don't want to have a bunch of animals and not treat them and let them run around with other animals, because it'll spread disease. So there's ways you can mitigate that. It doesn't have to be chemical, but there's an integrated pest management protocol that you can follow depending on how you want to approach the problem. That's very sufficient. So here's some beekeeping tools. This is called an uncapping fork. and you use that to scrape open the honey cell so it exposes the honey. And when it's exposed, you can put it in the centrifuge, and the spinning action, centrifugal force, draws the honey out for collection. This is a little vice bracket. If you don't have a great grip, or if you have mobility issues, that's a great tool to get in and grab the frame, and you can hold it securely. The smoker, put fuel in the smoker. Preferably plants with a low oil content. We don't want to put eucalyptus leaves in there. And the smoke makes bees think that their house is going to burn down, because they traditionally live in a tree. So if they smell smoke, that means forest fire. They'll gorge themselves on honey and fill their honey stomachs so they can leave and use those calories to build new wax if they have to relocate. So much like bees, when we eat a lot, we don't want to get in a fight. Like, you eat a big cheeseburger, you're like, no, take whatever you want. You don't want to. So it helps with the smoke, because they're a little bit bigger, like they're full, and so it's hard for them to curl their stingers up and sting you. And also covers up the guard pheromone. So the guards are alerting, someone's opening up our hive. You do a little smoke in there, it's like cutting the burglar alarm, and you can rob the place. And the older bees are the guard bees, and they're generally at the entrances of the colony. If you have a half-inch hole at the very top of the colony, you'll find guard bees there. Anywhere you find an opening, they're going to post some guards there. This is the hive tool we use, leverage to pull each individual frame out of the box. And then that's a brush for brushing off bees. Usually it's horsehair. The bees hate the brush.
Oh.
I don't know why anybody sells it. If you want to use it, give it a shot and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So this is generally what we use for construction. And Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth, he designed this in the late 1800s. It's a modular system. So no matter what way you want to go about it, if you have multiple colonies, all these parts are interchangeable with another part, and allows you to inspect every bit of surface area of comb. Some states won't allow you to have bees in a wine barrel because it's an uninspectable beehive. If it's sick, you can't really open it up to figure out what's going on and see both sides. So with these, it allows you to inspect every part of the colony and leaves nothing unturned. If you can't find the queen, it allows you to go through the colony. If you have honey up here and up here, you can pull it out and combine it, and we'll go into a lot of that. So the bottom board, it rests on everything. It acts as a landing board, and the brood boxes are going to be down below. So a brood box and a super just denotes a position. A brood box isn't a size, and a super isn't a size. A super just means it goes on top. So when we say super, it means you're going above, and nadir actually means going below. So when you see people talk about brood boxes, the bees generally build and put the brood, which is the eggs and developing bees, in the bottom because heat rises. And then in the top, in the supers, that's where they're going to put their honey, because once the honey is heated, it's a great insulator. They don't have to work on keeping the colony warm. And in the winter, they eat their way up through the honey, and they end up early spring at the top of the colony. So this is generally empty at the bottom, which really helps being modular, so you can pop it off and add another box in for the next season. They have different types of hive covers, whether you're in the full sun or not. Protective gear. I'll usually wear my suit. Sometimes you won't see me wear it. It just depends on the temperament of the bees, and I wouldn't advise anyone to do it. I've just been doing it for quite a while, and I can tell what's going to be a bad deal right off the bat, or what might be good. Much like you see a dog. If you know dogs, all you have to do is this: put your hand out, and if you see the tail wag, you know you're going to get some pets. But if the dog starts growling, that's a good indication. Okay, I'm going to leave you alone. Bees will kind of give you those same triggers and warnings. So I like the full suit. Some people just wear the veil where it covers the top. I like the baggy aspect, because if I lift up and a bee lands on my armpit, I put my arm down, it's going to get stung. Because it's not the material that protects you from the sting, it's that baggy, it's the barrier between your skin and the fabric that's going to protect you from the sting. Gloves, I like the sheepskin gloves. It allows for the most dexterity when you're working. When you get honey and it gets hot and cold, often leather and synthetic materials get crusty and they just don't last as long as sheepskin. And the veil is essential. It's not fun getting stung in the face. On the hands and fingers is not terrible, but if you're on a ladder or you require concentration, being free of worrying about a sting helps you a lot when you're working. Or if you have allergies, it's a mandatory tool. And I get a second belt, and you wrap the second belt around here to tighten that around so no bees can get under. If you're allergic and you're beekeeping, good kudos to you. And I would go for a full suit, floor to ceiling on that one. So we talked about the smoker a little bit. We like to have fire extinguishers or garden hoses around to use them. I won't use a smoker in a structure for fire hazard if we're in there. So we just have to figure out a way to deal with the bees that don't make them aggressive when we're in there. The bee brush, it knocks the bees off, so if you got to get it done, it'll work, but it's not my favorite. So I put pictures of cows. It's kind of a funny thing, but when you think of bees, think of cows, because bees are a livestock. We're growing them, we're moving them, they're grazing, much like you move cattle to different grazing locations. And at the end of the season, we're harvesting from them. In the beginning, we're making more of them. And as far as they're regulated in California and the country and what they do for us in terms of feeding us, they're probably one of the more important types of livestock that we have. And we do keep track of them, we register them. It's part of the registration process in Sacramento County. Right now it's free. So I think in a year or two that's going to change the ordinance. But that's why the picture of the cow's on there, because people oftentimes get colonies and they thought, oh, I like a green acres. I like that plant. I'm going to grab that plant, stick it in the yard and see how it looks. You know, bees are a really cool lawn ornament. It's fun to have a beer at night and sit and watch the bees fly, but it's important to treat them like livestock. You know, they're not going to live without your help. So it's important to be responsible for them, much like you would if you got a puppy. Hive inspections and maintenance. We're going to monitor their colony health. We don't want them growing too big before enough flowers are available for them. We want to keep them right where we like them. We're going to monitor for disease. Assess the queen activity. Once she starts to get old, her laying pattern is really going to diminuate. And then usually the bees will notice that and they'll make a new queen and kill the old one. But so we like to do that ourselves, because sometimes the old queen and the young queen will fight and they'll injure each other, and then you're out. You have 0 queens for your colony. So it's better off if we can facilitate that process. And part of that process is evaluating the brood pattern. Here's some developing bees. Look like little worms, little larvae. So if these were black and just empty, we would know she's basically shooting blanks, is what we call it. But that looks nice and full. And it's not a very big sample size. That's probably about that big of a space, that photo. But judged by that photo, she's doing it pretty well. There's no empty spots. So that would be either a really, really well-mated queen of a good lineage, or she's in her first year of laying and she's not missing a beat.
Oh, so the queen lives years.
Yeah, she can live up to 4 or 5 years, just as long as her sperm bank holds up, because she won't go out and mate again. And early problem identification. Need to be in the colony about once every 10 to 12 days during the springtime period. And that's going to be a good time frame to get out to notice any problems. A new queen can be made in 14 days. So if you decide not to check your colony for 3 weeks, it's 21 days. So 17 days or 7 days past a queen's gestation period, they may have made a new queen and half your colony may have swarmed and left. And probably one of your neighbors got pretty upset. Why are these bees in my house? I have a barbecue going on. This can't happen. But that's also half your honey supply flying off on you. That's half your honey workers flying off on you as well. So swarms are awesome. That's how I get free bees. That's how other people get free bees. And that's how bees reproduce in the general sense and create more. But it is something that garners the most complaints in Sacramento County, is swarming bees. And it's not generally, I can't attribute it to people, because we've got so many structures and we have so many trees that it could be all the feral colonies doing it and not the domesticated ones. Managing pests and diseases. We have a constant pressure because over 90% of colonies in the country are brought to California for pollination contracts. And we have the sweet spot. Nowhere else in the world do we have the amount of bees that we have in Sacramento County, because we have Highway 99, I-5, 50, and 80. And West Sac has the Deepwater Channel port. So everybody's bringing stuff in right through our backyards. Loomis, Lincoln, Elk Grove, Wilton, Davis, Woodland, all big areas for staging yards. Someone will bring 60,000 bee colonies from back east, and they're just waiting for the almonds to bloom. And they're, oh, not ready for 2 weeks. We're gonna go park them in Lincoln for 2 weeks. Now you just bought your house in Lincoln. Now you have 10,000 colonies sitting around the corner. So they're constantly casting swarms throughout that time, throughout their travel. And it's bees from all over the country, all these different lineages, all these different genetic pools, traits that grandpa grew, and then stuff that someone just bought on a store last week. It's all getting dispersed into our area. And with the amount of trees and old structures, it really facilitates quite an ecosystem for honeybees here. So common threats of varroa mite is a parasite, and the mite basically sucks on the bees' blood and eats their blood fat, is what we call it, the hemolymph. Wax moths, just like any butterfly, any lepidopteran insect, they lay an egg, turns into a caterpillar. except this caterpillar eats bees, wax, honey, and pollen. So it'll just eat a straight line. It doesn't really matter what's in front of it. So that's one of, and they're actually genetically engineering the wax moths to eat polymers, to eat plastic in landfills. So they're getting some good use out of it. In a tree cavity, a colony will live 4 or 5 years till the wax becomes unusable. The wax moths will move in and destroy it. And then the year after that, they've got a completely empty volume to start all over again. That'll last another, a new lease, as we call it. So monitoring and treatment, there's different methods that you can use to treat and monitor for problems. And as long as you're in the colony enough during spring, you can get some early detection symptoms of that and act to prevent that from getting any worse. Hive hygiene maintenance, a lot of that's going to really depend on the bees' genetics. Just like some people are hoarders, and you see on TV, they've got old like food wrappers piled up around the house, and you go to other people's houses and they've got absolute spick and span house, no trash anywhere, like looks like they just dusted everything 5 minutes ago. So that's part of the hive hygiene maintenance that we look for in bees. And if we can do things to help meet them in the middle, that really helps the bees get a better chance at colony survival. Because our entire goal is to make honey, and once we get to the end of summer, the entire goal is prepare them to survive winter. This is a picture of a gentleman feeding their bee colonies. We don't feed our bees. There's plenty of food around here for them. And if I've got a colony that's not producing, I'll kill the queen and combine those bees with a colony that's strong and eliminate that underperforming genetic. Because only about 30% of our genetics that we get from colony relocations are satisfactory in terms of honey production. Because most of them are older queens. We're getting 3 or 4-year-old queens out of tree swarms for a while. So you can feed them sugar water. And you can also feed pollen patties. So again, that's the carbohydrates and the protein. And then health and nutrition, one thing about minimizing stress, when you're doing hive inspections, when I first started, it took me 45 minutes to go through a colony. And now it should take me like 2 minutes when you go through. Because they're used to living in a tree, and a tree never gets opened up or dismantled. So when we're working with the bee colony, we're opening it up and exposing it to sunlight, and it's getting the air moving through it like that. They're not used to that. So knowing some bee behavior will help mitigate some stresses down the line. Because some people open their colony every 3 days just to see what's going on, and the bees say, forget this, I'm leaving. And that person gets discouraged and quits beekeeping. So this is part of the things we want to discourage on having people drop the program. Harvest and honey, 3 different colors of honey. You can harvest honey from the same colony different times a year. It'll look different. Or you can harvest honey from 2 different colonies at the same time of year. It'll look different. You can even hold up a frame and you'll see amber and then dark brown in it. So even in one frame, you'll see different honeys in it. And it depends on what the bees are gathering. And when you taste the honeys, notice that the colors, some of the light ones may have a different tasting note. Some of the darker ones may have a different one. I'm not going to say any of the notes. I'll let you guys figure out your own on there. So this is honeycomb. This is capped with 100% wax. And they cap it with wax so it's airtight, because honey is very dry and it's 17% moisture content. So if we expose honey to the air and the air has more moisture than that, the honey is actually going to pull moisture from the air until the moisture content is high enough to ferment, and then it starts making alcohol. So that's why they cover it with 100% wax. When the bees cover their developing brood, it's half wax, half pollen. So there's oxygen exchange going on as the bees are gestating. And uncapping, the uncapping fork we saw, that's what we use to open up the caps. And in a traditional colony, this would be a wood frame, and you put that into a centrifuge and spin it. This, however, we would do the crush and strain method. This is not suitable to go back into a bee colony because it's warped in shape, and we need those nice tight tolerances of a straight plane to go in our colonies, because the bees are going to build whatever's next to it. So if we have a big wavy design, the bees are going to build a big wavy design to maintain that gap. And people put in hearts in their colonies, so the bees draw out hearts. They put all sorts of cool designs in there, but the bees will follow it. So the bees followed every bit of space they could in this trunk. And much like yellow jackets will build a paper envelope around a colony, honeybees will put down a tree resin. It's called propolis. So inside the bee colonies, both feral colonies in the trees and inside of our boxes, they'll put that down as a antimicrobial, antifungal. And in a decaying tree, it also keeps moisture from coming into the cavity, because oftentimes insides of the tree cavities will decay and rot, and that bottom portion retains a lot of moisture and essentially turns it into soil. So that's how part of how they keep their colony dry. So impact of harvest, timing and technique. I like to harvest certain times a year based on what's flowering. When a big bloom ends, like when the privet bloom ends, I like to go pull honey and try and get a note or a tasting note out of that honey. And we don't want to harvest right up until winter because we're not going to leave them with anything. So in October is probably the last time you can get away with harvesting honey around here before the bees can collect enough to make it through the winter. And about 40 pounds for an average size colony is enough to get them through the winter, 40 pounds of honey. So processing and storing, we filter our honey, we don't strain it, so it gets out any big pieces of wax, any bee legs or wings, any pieces of wood that broke off from the woodware that we're using. Sometimes we're extracting in a backyard and a couple leaves will blow in. So the straining gets that out, but we want to leave the pollen in the honey, both for the taste, consistency, and a little bit of nutrition benefits. You get some more vitamins and minerals from the pollen as well. Not enough pollen in there to give any protein benefit reading. So safe bottling. So honey is the least regulated food product in all of the food world. So combine that with the least regulated animal and livestock, and you really have a wild west of the beekeeping world, especially in this area. So you'll see people selling their honey on this corner and milk jugs they've washed out. So any number of things, and that could be the best honey around. Who knows? So safe bottling. If we're going to go sell it, and people are going to give us money for it, I want to follow all the food safety laws, whether it's in a commercial kitchen or cottage food. We have our certified producer certificate from the county, so that's how we stay in compliance with that. And then optimal storage conditions. Try not to store it in the garage. That heat is not good for it. Think of it like wine. Get it in a cool, dark place, and it's sealed, and that'll be the best way to keep it, to change it the least, and cause the least amount of degradation. The honey will stay good forever, but if it's exposed to heat and light, it'll start losing some of the tastes and aromas in there. It'll still maintain the sugar. It'll always be a saccharide, but it'll start to lose, much like if you have dried basil, and once it's dried, you put it in the jar. But if you just left it on top of the fridge for 6 months, it's gonna smell like hay. So that's the same concept with the honey. And honey by volume is 25% denser than water. So if we have a 12-ounce container of water, it's going to fit 1 pound of honey, 16 ounces worth of honey by weight. So pollen, propolis, and wax. Beeswax have almost an infinite amount of uses, cosmetics, candles. I've seen people mix them with some solutions to waterproof their boots. They use beeswax in dental applications and a number of products. Pollen is a great protein supplement, and it's pretty expensive. It's a little bit more expensive than honey by weight, and it's very rich in proteins, vitamins, and minerals. And then medicinal propolis. Propolis is what's causing this dark coloring on the wood frame on the top, and that's those tree resins. And propolis in Latin means good population. So that's how 100,000 bees can live in a little box and not get sick. So it's antifungal, antimicrobial, antibacterial, and it smells amazing. It's essentially a tree resin or tree wax. When it's cold, it's hard and brittle. When it's warm, it's really malleable and aromatic. And most time people use the propolis in an alcohol tincture. I think Deb has some at her shop that she has for sale. So Beekeeping 101 conclusion. We went over a little bit of knowledge to help you be successful in your beginning beekeeping ventures. We showed a few tools, and then we went over some good practices, best practices, and then went over a little bit of responsible harvesting techniques. Enzymes to invert it. So if you have sucrose, so think of a fructose and a glucose molecule. What the bees do is their enzymes, they break it apart and they just store it. So they take the sucrose, break it apart, and they store it as fructose and glucose. And that's why honey is mostly comprised of fructose and glucose, because it's gone through the process of the enzyme in the bee's stomach. And the bees have a honey crop or a honey stomach they use to store the nectar. So all the nectar that goes in and out gets some of that enzyme in it. And the enzyme is called invertase. You see that down there, down the road. A lot of vitamins and minerals, amino acids, phenols, and flavonoids, terpenes, and tannins. There's a book back there about spices, and it covers a lot of different terpene profiles. So lemon, the lemon smell, limonene is the terpene responsible for that citrus smell. It's the same chemical in lemons, lemon balm, lemon basil, and lemon thyme. Anything lemon smell has that same chemical in it. And that limonene happens to be half of the chemical profile of the queen bee pheromone.
So when you hear people say use lemongrass to attract bees, it's because of the limonol inside that plant that mimics part of the bees. So when the bees are out collecting nectar, they're concentrating it. Because nectar is about 99% water. And if you remember, 17% water is our honey content. They've got to bring it from 99 down to 17. So not only are they concentrating the sugars in there, they're concentrating all the chemicals from the plant, basically. So you have different medicinal properties from the plant. They're also concentrating phytochemicals. That's the word you're looking for. So they're collecting all these phytochemicals, chemicals made by plants, and they're refining it. So it's almost a form of distillation. It's kind of a sugar tincture. And when bees hit the flowers, they're almost painting the landscape. So when you see wildflowers blooming, that's the fingerprint of the bees from last season. So you can kind of tell what the bees hit last year based on what's blooming now. Has no bearing on what the bees might collect this year because there may be something bigger and better out there for them at the time you see that. Or what you're looking at is such a small portion of what's out there compared to something, they're just ignoring it. You may see a really cool patch of clover, but the neighbor's got an acre of pumpkins. So they're going to go to where quantity is more accessible as opposed to quantity. Because they've got kids to feed. So honey is very acidic, as are most sugars. And honey, just like they use sugar for battlefield medicine because it draws out moisture from wounds, you'll see surgical dressings made out of honey as well. Because of it's not sterile, but it's an antiseptic. So honey's not going to kill anything off. It's just going to inhibit it from propagating, from growing. That's why they say no botulism or no botulism spores for kids in the honey, because the honey's not going to destroy the botulism. It would just perfectly preserve it, not let it grow. So when you see sterile honey, it's not really a thing. And then pollen will be in there depending on processing. Some places strain the pollen out because that reduces the possibility of the honey to crystallize. Because the honey won't turn solid if there's nothing for it to crystallize on. Much like when they make rock candy, you have warm water, dissolve the sugar in there, and let it cool. So you have an oversaturated solution. And the minute you get something in there to touch it, the crystals start forming. So because there's ash from wildfire, there's dust that kicks up on the flower and got into bees' feet because there's pollen on there. That's going to cause honey to crystallize because it'll initiate nucleation. Which, like we learned with kids, how snowflakes form in the sky. And the formless is a piece of dust for it to start that crystallography. Is my honey organic or GMO? I get calls every year from Pepsi Company, and they recycle their cans. And sometimes they have tanks that leak their corn syrup, and you'll have a river of corn syrup in the parking lot, and you'll have millions of bees getting after it. Because that time of year, there's not a lot of flowers blooming out there, and this corn syrup spilled, and the bees are all over. So when you think of, is my honey organic? You can't really police every bee and make sure every bee fed from a flower that was fed with organic fertilizer and wasn't sprayed with something. It's kind of like deer. People go, oh, I'll go hunting deer because it's good game. I enjoy game meat as well. But you can't say it's organic because it probably just hopped someone's fence and ate all their Roundup roses the night before. So they're out there in the world collecting things, and they're going to concentrate it. And if it's bad enough, it will kill the colony, or it'll exhibit a symptom that's declining for that reason. So honey labeled organic, it's unless you live somewhere where you're at least 5 miles away, because the bees will fly about 5 miles to forage on a round trip. And even at that length, they're not coming back with much in the tank. It's like driving 40 miles to fill your gas tank. You're going to come home fumes anyway. So as long as they're out in an area where you can confidently say and again, honey is the least regulated food product, so you can get away with it. You've seen it. In California, local honey is considered 100 miles from source to point of sale. Because our state's so big, we have several different climates. You could be coastal. We talked about this a little bit last time. It could be coastal, and it could be desert, it could be alpine, chaparral, swampy even. So because it's 100 miles, it's local, you're getting those benefits from honey that you're looking for. So within 100 miles, you can reasonably find the same type of honey around here. So that's why they call it local. And there's a company, they sell it in Rayleigh's. They named their company local. It's genius. So the first thing you see is local honey. It's not local honey. It's just the name of the company. So they're sneaky. If you process honey in another country and follow those countries' standards for organic production, you can import to California and call your honey organic. I don't trust some of those countries. And they may have something on there that is legal to spray on their plants, and they still harvest it, and they can still call it organic because they sell it here. It's called organic. Big problem in California wine industry. Your wine could be 25% blend of non-California, and they can call it a red blend, red California. So if you're buying a red California blend, they only have to have 75% of that be from California. So that adulteration and called honey laundering, much comes into effect with honey. Because they'll often cut it and skirt those laws, and they'll outsell the domestic producers because domestic producers have a harder time obtaining organic certification. Whether that's California certified organic foods, or if that's going to be Organic Materials Research Institute, which are two companies really expensive to get those logos on your product. So supplemental feeding, a lot of beekeepers feed sugar water to bees because they pull every drop of honey they have to sell. I don't know why. And to backfill that, they give them sugar water. Sometimes new beekeepers will give bees sugar so they build wax comb faster. But if for any reason the honeybees find a good source of nectar, they're going to kind of ignore that sugar water and they'll just start storing it. Just put it in the pantry. Put the crap in the pantry for later. I want to eat the good fresh stuff now. So the bees will store all that sugar water in the colony. And then when I go to harvest honey, I'm spinning out sugar water into my honey. It's concentrated, so it's sucrose, but it's not honey. You're not getting all the benefits. And so supplemental feeding is something I like to stay away from. And you can't avoid it. Hummingbird feeders, people put those out all the time. The bees will compete for those. So the bees are going to get adulterated products no matter what. It's just hard to get around. And it's the least regulated food product. So that's why it's really important to trust where you're getting your honey from. And if you look at the prices for honey, it really shows a difference. We sell honey for about $20 a pound. That's about the market price for retail sales. And then if you go to the grocery store, they're selling the clover honey for $7, $8. And it won't crystallize. And they pasteurize it, and they get it really warm, so it's sterile, so you're losing all the enzyme benefits in there. And they do that so it runs through the processing machinery quickly. And because customers like seeing that liquid jar of honey. I've had people call me and say, my honey went bad and I threw it out. Can I have another one? So what happened? I'm so sorry. I thought it even fermented and I missed something. That's what happened. It got hard, so I threw it away. Oh. Now, so the general American consumer wants that liquid honey, and so the producers listen. And that's why you see most of the honey does not crystallize. Because it's devoid of any particulates. They don't want it to crystallize. They won't provide it. So what type of honey is it? I get asked that quite frequently. And we don't have any monoculture around here. Monoculture means it's one type of plant grown in a big quantity in an area. And if you go further north, you'll find a lot of rice paddies. Even that's not real beneficial to bees. We just don't have it around here. When you get to the orchards along the 99 corridor and 5 corridor, that's when you start getting into the monocultures. But in this area, all the way through the foothills, you'll have a big blend of plants depending on what's going on. And then monoculture versus our urban setting. Because rural versus urban, you're going to have a lot more diversity of plants. People have their roses, people have their squash, people have all different sorts of stuff that they plant. Especially in Sacramento and Fair Oaks, these older towns, pioneers brought all their crazy plants with them from their ancestry, from their heritage countries. So we have a really wide variety of plants that people brought here. And because of the wide variety of people we have here, they desire different types of plants, different types of food. So we grow all sorts of stuff here. And people take care of it. Bees kind of are taxing the world. You get mad if I hop your fence and start taking tomatoes. But bees can fly over the fence and take your nectar all day long. Thanks for watering. Thanks for planting this. Thanks for fertilizing it. Bees are taking it. So they've got so much to go for as opposed to a monoculture setting or out in the rural environment. So time of season is important. And I brought a couple foraging books, I think 3 or 4 foraging books back there, because it's really important to know what's blooming in the area. I call them forage recons. Once a month I'll go walk to the river and I'll walk to see what's blooming, see what's new, what's different. Because I don't plant my tomatoes based on the time of the weather. I just stare at the blackberry bush. When the blackberry bush starts to bloom, then I know it's time to start slamming my tomatoes in the ground. So indicator plants is what I'm looking for out there in the world. And based on how much rainfall we've had, you can superimpose that with, okay, I know how much rain we've had. These plants are going to do well. These plants are going to fall off quick. Here's my honey producers. So you're kind of sniping on what's going on. And if you have a good year for honey and plants are looking good out there, then I'm going to let some colonies get a little bit bigger and produce some honey. If it starts to get dry, I'm going to split those colonies into two. And instead of them focusing on building honey, they're going to be building from the ground up. So who is growing what? ESAC has a lot of geraniums. ESAC's got a lot of elms. We have a lot of sycamores out here. We've got a lot of maples. So different neighborhoods have different things. Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights, and Orangeville have more citrus than we do. They used to have all the historic orchards before the freeze. So you'll see a lot out there. In and out very is palm trees. So palm trees, most have male and female palms, and the bees love going for the pollen on there. Bees will also visit some types of wind-pollinated plants for the protein, just for the pollen. So corn is wind-pollinated. Honeybees don't have any business pollinating it, but because the pollen is nutritious and accessible, the bees will hit the male flowers, the tassels, and then take off. So again, how much precipitation we have, that's really going to dictate. And you can look at a plant in your garden and you can tell if it's in a vegetative mode, where it's stacking up growth nodes and leaves and stalks and stems and growing roots, or if it's switched over to floral mode, fruit and floral. And you can see what's going to happen. You can see when you go look at the vetch out in the field, you can see if it's growing purple flower stalks or if it's still premature. And that can kind of give you some idea of how much rain are we going to have and help you gauge how much honey you can go out there and harvest. Each colony can produce 50 to 150 pounds per year. If you harvest one time per year, you're probably going to get closer to that 70, 75 pound mark. But if you pull 50 pounds out at the end of spring, then you can pull 50 at the end of summer, then you can pull 50 in the fall, and leave the bees with 40 or 50 surplus. Go that way. Because if they're full, they won't have any place to put more. So if they're full, they're full. And part of harvesting honey is getting ahead of that, pulling that rug out from them. So no, you're not done. Keep working. Keep that carrot in front of the cart, if that makes sense. So they will rise to the occasion. And it takes about 7 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So if you're starting a new colony, the wax is very calorie dense, calorie intensive. So if you're building from the first year, most of that honey is going to go towards your wax production. In your second year, you're going to see more of a surplus because your wax is already created. So bees invert the sugar. We talked about them taking in the sucrose, and invertase is the name of the enzyme, and that breaks it down into glucose and fructose. If you go to a baking section of a baking store, you'll see inverted sugar, and they've still chemically, is that this, I can't remember where they're getting this. I think they're growing it somehow. There's also a way to create this in the lab. Double check on that for the class. So invertase is also found in our lower intestine, and it's also found in our livers. It's what our livers use to help break down sugars as well. And it's not very commonly found in nature. Pretty much all the bees have this, but it's not very common. So we mentioned nectar is 99% water. And that's the amount of work these bees do. They'll fly all day to collect the nectar and spend all night to dehydrate and refine it. So they're working almost 24 hours a day. They don't really sleep, but they kind of take rest periods. So the dehydration and the application of enzymes in conjunction with each other, they create the honey. And if we take a frame out of the colony, and we tip it on its side, and we shake it, and it starts dripping like rain, we know, we call it wet honey, because its moisture content is still high enough, the bees aren't capping it, and it's not viscous enough to be retained in the cell, and through the surface tension, it falls out. So that's one of the tests I use when I'm harvesting honey. I'll pull the frame out and tap it. If it doesn't drip, you're pretty close, you can bet that you can harvest it. If not, you can also use a refractometer, and that'll get you the exact fridge content of the honey and moisture content. Because that'll prevent fermentation issues. If you harvest honey that's too wet, it'll ferment inside the jar, and you'll have jars that start blowing their lids. Or if the honey's really full, kind of like if you shake a beer and open it, it turns to bubbles and pushes itself out. So if you're fermenting honeys in a jar, it creates those bubbles, and the honey starts to push itself up out of the jar, and you'll come back and just be oozing all the way down your shelf over the course of a week or two if you don't notice it. If you have a big, a 5-gallon pail will hold about 60 pounds of honey. So if you have a large amount of honey in a container and fermentation is a problem, it could ruin a whole crop really quickly. Plan B is to make mead out of it, but there's really no saving it once it starts to ferment. It's got that taste and aroma. Honey is passively hydrophilic, and it's a humectant, meaning it's not going to mix well with water. But it also helps it apply things to. If you mix something with honey, like a hot pepper, it's going to apply that hot pepper really well to your lips. Put it that way, 'cause it's sticky. So you'll see people put topical herbs in honey and use that as a type of salve. And that's where it gets the benefit of mixing beeswax or coconut oil, and you can make salves out of the honey. Part of the reason it crystallizes is bees keep it about 96 degrees in the colony. It's almost our temperature, which is pretty neat. So the entire time the honey exists, it's 96 degrees. And when you harvest it and it goes into your kitchen, now you're dropping it. Now you're doing that rock candy effect. You're taking the oversaturated solution, and now you're exacerbating that crystallization because you're putting it in an even colder environment. Especially if you store your jars on the cement floor, something like that, it's going to draw the heat out of it. The colder it is, the faster it crystallizes. And I don't mind crystallized honey. Some people like it, some people have a dislike to it. So when we taste the honey, try and notice the different tasting notes. And I think there's breadsticks and some water back there, so you can kind of cleanse your palate between each one and see what you like out of it. Are you making chicken wing recipes? Are you making baking? Is it for your tea or your coffee? Are you making desserts? And what are you going to use this honey for? And if you're a consumer of honey, this kind of helps you figure out what kind of honey you'd like. I've seen people say no to some types of honey. Say, I don't like that one. It doesn't happen very often. We have a coriander honey over there, and some people have an aversion to cilantro. Try that one and see if it says the same thing. Some people say that cilantro tastes like soap. I think it's a genetic receptor that people have that is unique. So I'm curious to see if the coriander honey has it, if you're brave enough. So honey doesn't taste like the source. Honey doesn't mean that blackberry honey will taste like blackberry. And I do have a blackberry honey, and we do have an avocado honey. So those flavors are pretty unique and well known to you. So when you taste those, compare it. There's 2 orange blossom honeys over there as well. Because the nectar is not for us to taste. The plant just wants to trick us into eating that delicious orange to spread the seed. So that's why the nectars and the fruits taste different. And the sugar content's not the same. You have more fructose, more fruit-based sugar in the fruit as opposed to the nectar, which is more of a sucrose and glucose blend. So that accounts for a large portion of the different flavors. Also, an orange stands up a lot better in the 110 degree summer heat as opposed to a delicate flower would. So you lose a lot. If those flowers are going to be blooming in the heat, a lot of those terpenes and smells would off-gas and be gone with the heat. So I think it's part of the reason why we've got a different flavor profile with honey than we do with the fruit. Apple honey is really good, but it's hard to get a hold of. The earlier in the year that the plant flowers, the more likely those bees are to use that up in the season. So you don't see a whole lot of apple honey around. So there's almost an infinite possibility of inputs on every harvest. It's kind of like when they say wine, oh, that year was a great year, the dirt was awesome, or the rain was wonderful. However they say for wine, you can say the same thing for honey. It's just going to be I call it a time capsule, because at no other time is that honey going to be like that. Different rain, different temperatures. Bees have a different choice of what they're going for. So I like to save jars from every pollinator location I do, and every time we harvest, you compare them, because it'll never be the same. Which is another reason why you go to the store, all the honey is the same. The next decade, all the honey is the same, it tastes the same, all the same. So we're trying to break the market out of that one type of honey, which is essentially the blend. Well, that's it.